Hi, everyone. Welcome to our final episode of our first season of Sip and Solve. Getting ready, got my oat milk and instant coffee all ready for you. So, today we have such an exciting conversation because, as so many of you all know, I took a year off to do the Harvard Loeb Fellowship, which was just life changing. And I got the pleasure of working with one of the professors at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. And today you all will get to meet her and we're going to have all the conversations. But before I bring her up, I want to preview a little bit of what we talked about and do a throwback video from my time at Harvard. So check it out. Hi, my name is Catherine, and I'm a Loeb Fellow, and I'm so excited to be joining you today to talk about connectivity meets community.
Meaningful design of places to support social ties and grow relationships with each other and the natural world around us really can be so much more. We have an incredible opportunity to pioneer a new generation of community design and development that imagines our homes and the spaces between them as places of connectivity, resilience, and joy.
We have our student ethnographer, Shrey, come on and say hi to the people, who's going to be conducting our interviews today. And we're so excited to share our student voices from people who think about the built world every day. So thanks for joining us.
I've lived for short periods of time with extended family, but not permanently. When we did live together, the benefits are there's always someone at home. There's a lot of sharing, and there's always something to do. There's always an activity going on, and also I think parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, their responsibilities were divided when they were looking after us. So it was just a different experience.
I personally would like to have my parents live with me in the future, as I get older, if not me and my siblings, live with them. But I think my personal values, I would rather have my parents very close by and know how they're being taken care of, especially as they get older.
My experience from urban planning and from my role at the city is that the more diversity you can encourage in land use policies, the more beneficial it is to older adults' social experiences and to everyone's social experiences. That means diversity in several senses. So diversity of income, of age, of culture is really important just for creating healthy social settings. But diversity of land use is huge.
As well as all of the research, is that there's really a need for different housing solutions that aren't focused on single families or just single people. I think that the advantages when it comes to loneliness and feeling connected to your community, to the people around you, to your family, just everyone at large, just far outweighs what you get when you live alone. And at least having the option and accessibility to these different opportunities is really important.
All right, so let's bring up Elizabeth Cristoforetti. So Elizabeth, it's so great to have you here today. So why don't you tell everyone a little bit about your background and the work that you do at Harvard and otherwise, of course.
Sure, yeah. So my name's Elizabeth Cristoforetti, and I'm a designer. I focus on the scale of architecture and urbanism. I run a firm in Cambridge, Massachusetts called Supernormal, and we design urban spaces and housing and kind of everything in between. And I'm also a professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, where, Catherine, I had the great pleasure of working with you and the researchers you pulled in on this idea of what it might be like to live together in the future and imagine a better built environment. So that's maybe the long and the short.
That is awesome. Now tell us what you're drinking today.
I'm drinking a cup of Yorkshire Gold tea. Very specific about my black tea.
Okay. And that is very, very healthy. I love it.
Yes, it is delicious.
That is awesome. Well, as you will hear today in the conversation, finding Elizabeth was like finding a needle in the haystack, because I went to Harvard with this question of what does it mean to create a love village, which are wellness, in my mind, wellness focused lifestyle communities designed for diverse audiences. And I was tickled to find that you really were my needle in the haystack, that you had actually kind of looked at this issue and knew a lot about it. And so tell us a little bit about kind of the work that in the spectrum of work they're using, because you get to see the coolest work that the students are presenting, the best ideas out there around how you design communities from a totally different framework.
Yeah, I mean, I got into this having nothing to do with the school actually, but what I realized over time is that there's some things we can do in practice in the world as designers and architects. And then there's like some stuff that you kind of have to do it like the academic setting is really great for it, because you can, maybe there are things that have a different value system than people are willing to pay you for. And, if you have a very specific idea about the way the world might be, but like, I don't know, the financial instruments of the world as it is right now aren't going to pay for it. It's a really nice opportunity. So yeah, so it was some observations really in practice, kind of trying to figure out why can't these communities, why can't these communities that we're designing be better? Why can't they be better for a more diverse range of people? Why do they have to create monocultures? And so, what that's really become at the GSD is explorations that bridge together questions that traditionally we think about in architecture. How do we make a livable, wonderful space, something that is culturally productive? But also things that kind of make the housing market tick right now, like finance and policy. And so it's kind of bringing all three of those together, and then trying to really think about what a substantive community would really need to thrive.
That's fascinating. So some of the work that really sparked our conversation was moving from like this new urbanist design, and maybe you can explain in layman's terms what new urbanism is, to something different, like the next generation of community design that developers could actually embrace, that allowed for us to live differently and in a more organic way.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, new urbanism is, I would say maybe an ideology or a way of imagining the world that kind of sprang up in the 80s and 90s in the US. And like, you kind of can't disagree with new urbanism. It says things like, we should have walkable places, and we should have main streets, and we should have living next to other uses, and we shouldn't separate things so much. We should bring them together. But when it got kind of smashed together with the market, particularly in post-recession, the real estate boom of after the recession, and frankly, it's a trend that's been going on for a long time in America. What we really see is, these community developments that are largely, stamped out same after same, or very, very self-similar houses that actually don't end up having a whole lot of other uses. And they're single families, and they're on one plot for one house. And what you end up having is communities that are, $200,000 houses live here, $1 million houses live here, right. And then there's like a highway in between them. It's like, it's better, So I think it's about, being smart about the design, but being really pragmatic about the other levers that are being pulled.
Yeah. So one of the things that I was obsessed with is thinking about beyond just townhomes. Like, okay, so we're going to design a townhome community, and maybe there'll be some single family homes, and we're going to put a curb cut in front of every single house, and we're going to make sure everybody has a private driveway. And so we're going to design it to be walkable, but we're also going to design it so it's very vehicle friendly, so that everybody can just drive into their house and never have to say hello to any of their neighbors. And you've actually taken some time to reimagine what these townhome kind of new construction communities could actually look like.
Yeah, and I would say it's even more than townhomes. I mean, one of the big observations that we talked about a lot when you were at the GSD was this kind of weird situation where it was like, not only do like these larger groups of homes gang together, but like if you're on a block, if you're in an urban block, you couldn't have more than one type. Like you couldn't have a townhouse next to a single family home next to a 4-unit. Like nobody can do that.
Handle.
It's too risky, you know? So yeah, no, so I've been kind of hard at work, thinking both, you know, with state developers, with community land trusts. I realized that ownership, new ways of thinking about ownership is really important, and trying to figure out how to diversify. So yes, a townhouse type, but also a single family with an accessory dwelling unit that might be able to be rented out to a seasonal worker, or maybe even a very, very small cooperative. And how do we get those housing types to work together around shared space? And you know, we've talked about this, but the real challenge is that it's about more than design. It's about the way that the let's say the boundaries of ownership operate. And so things like a community land trust really help because they break it up in different ways, and they actually enable different and I would say more productive potentials for design and community life. But it's a challenge.
Yep. So how do you actually design a community so that people can kind of have these organic places of connection and not have it be so vehicle focused and so individualistic?
Totally. Well, I mean, it kind of depends on the scale. So, you know, I've looked at this at the urban scale, so kind of dense areas that are already populated and you're infilling in urban neighborhoods. Looked at it at the suburban scale. So what happens if you make a new community? And we've looked at it at the rural scale, which is to say it's very, very compact and dense, but surrounded by woods. And in all of those cases, I think thing that it really came down to is this question of how do you create a kind of some amount of shared space around which you can all gather. And sometimes that means pushing parking out, or, you know, taking it and having it in a shared space inside the lot and in a way that's surrounded by landscape and playscapes and other things. But at the end of the day, you know, really what it's come down to for us is thinking about the plot of the home, the homeowner kind of owning the home or having that be the bounded area within which ownership happens, and then the ground around it being a shared space that is designed very, very carefully for people to be able to have a more diverse range of ways of interacting than they would otherwise. And so that. And of course, you know, like there's a lot of literature and stuff out there that talks about, you know, how do you live from and create play from 9 to 90? You know, these things are all kind of right. But the question is, how do you get that into into a scale and an experience that people within a single block or two blocks can really use?
So interesting. So you spend a lot of time, and the just brilliant brains at Harvard get to talk about systems and design systems and how we set up kind of the planning systems and the zoning laws and what needs to be challenged. You've gotten to see a lot of different ideas from students. Some of these students' master's theses are just fascinating. So one, I'd love to hear about the ideas and the conversations that are being had at Harvard, and then also dive into the work in the lab that you help run, and how you all are really pushing the envelope and pushing people to think about these systems that we've created differently.
Yeah. I think, I mean, there's an incredible amount of really, really remarkable happening at the GSD all the time. It's kind of magical. You sit up at the top of these trays of people doing all of this work, and you see the design and the landscape, just kind of unrolling. It's kind of magical. Maybe I'll talk about a couple of things that have come up in some of my thesis student work recently. I think that's really pointed. We always look back at the end of the year on what the thesis students are producing, because it's actually a really good gauge of what we might see emerging in the world in 10 years. Mm-hmm. And so it's a little bit like a canary in the coal mine. And I've had maybe in the past 3 years, the things that have started to bubble up are specifically in relationship to housing, are questions about climate adaptation, of course. So ownership strategies and climate adaptation. I had an amazing student, Chandler Caserta. He won this big award, so everyone should go check out his work. It's published somewhere. It was a housing award, actually. And he was looking at a sort of low-lying middle-income neighborhood on the border of New York City. And very, very vulnerable in rapid sea level rise conditions, particularly in storm surge conditions. And he was looking at, over time, how might this community go from these kind of single or two family conditions and then elevate up still maintain their ownership, but gradually migrate over the course of 10 years to maintain the equity, to grow community space, both at ground level through a kind of natural embrace of the way that the landscape might change, but also, accrue, more equity above grade, but also better shared space. And so that was really remarkable, and it was phased. And he recommended both design, but then also policy changes, because of course, the mechanisms for this are both at the level of design and policy. At a really high level, there are other students who are also looking at shared models for housing, so collective housing that are, I'd say, appropriate to the culture of immigrant communities in Detroit and elsewhere. Really thinking about multi-generational housing, as you know. And really, what can we do as designers? We can innovate on what it means to live and what it feels like to be home in a community. And they're doing this through the lens of architecture.
It just makes me believe in the future when I see these ideas and how serious and determined and dedicated and thoughtful the feedback is that the students get from the professors. And you're right. It's kind of like the ideas that we're going to see in 10 years, given the growth, let's say, of multi-generational households, which so few people talk about. We need to start thinking about different designs for our housing. So how do you design for belonging? How do you design so that more people who, as we become a more diverse culture, we are aging, there are all kinds of things that are shifting in our culture. How do we start to design so that more and more people see themselves reflected in the built world?
Yeah, from a process-based well, let me just say first, when you design something, unless you're designing it for a particular family, if you're designing multifamily conditions or conditions for a developer or a community land trust, you don't know who's actually going to live there, right?
Yeah.
So what you have to do is your best to make it as open and viable for the kinds of people and households that you think might appear there in the future. And so what we do from a kind of methodology perspective is talk to people. Like, who are the people in the community that need housing?
About that.
What is it that you need? This seems really dumb, but that's not necessarily what would actually happen in a normal project. People aren't going out into the world and saying, actually, the ambulance driver from down the street is looking for an apartment. Well, what does his family structure look like? What does he need? And when we do that, we do see patterns emerge, and there are some things that are very similar across places and some things that are different. I think, a really good rule of thumb for us is to understand different stages of life and to make sure that there's as much crossover within different stages of life as possible. So, a really basic one are things like, community gardens or beautifully paved spaces that don't necessarily just have to house vehicles, but can be kind of playscapes. Making sure that there are porches. These are kind of in a way dumb and known, but being able to integrate each of those little pieces and variables into what I can imagine as the kind of algorithm of a community is not actually as simple as it seems, because it's not just about designing the homes, but also the spaces around and between the homes, and even thinking about other non-residential programs. Like, we talked a lot about public baths, right?
Yes.
And how amazing would that be? It's so important in so many cultures, but it's not something we do here. So thinking kind of creatively about that in relationship to climates is also something we do.
Yeah, one of my favorite ideas was the concept, and we kind of kicked it around, of mother's dens, like having mothers and even families. I actually know somebody who is co-housing with another family who has small kids, so they can kind of share in the resources, share in the responsibilities, create a unique environment. And a lot of that is about how do you make sure that there's a place for everybody in this kind of built world.
No, totally. One of the projects we worked on a number of years ago was in a community called Mattapan in Boston, and we realized really quickly that the number of single mother households there was remarkable. It was the highest number of single mother households in the entire city. And really what people needed was community. Some people had it through multi-generational conditions, aunties and cousins, but a lot of people didn't. And that is what they needed. And I still hold to that. I think this question of how do we design, what is shared I mean, we can say that outside, but when you think about it in a kind of co-housing situation, it's, traditionally we think about a kitchen, but like, what are the other things? What is individual and what is shared? This is kind of an interesting research question.
Yep. So you all also spend a lot of time thinking about density and how do we start to, because we all know we need to build more and people are scared of what building more looks like. So how do you address those kind of density wars and what is the middle ground?
Yeah, it's really, it's such a different conversation in different areas. So I'll kind of talk very briefly about two extremes. In practice right now, I'm looking at a rural area. We were looking at a 120 acre parcel. This is in an area of the world that it's a beautiful national park, and the average income in the county is the highest of any county in Michigan, and it is really, really challenging for teachers and anyone earning a reasonable middle income wage to live there. And at the same time, the community is very, very afraid of development. And so on this 120 acre parcel, what would traditionally be cleared 60 acres of it, let's say, and, meted out in these single family homes with the curving roads, you can all kind of picture that. We said, well, no, what if we instead did like these 3 really dense pods of 30 homes? So you get 120 homes. Wow. But they're actually like at an urban level of density. So it's a sort of strange thing where you're bringing a kind of urbanism like literally into the woods, and you're minimizing your roads, so that the fire engine can get in there and all of those things that need to happen. But then you have these like kind of magical little villages where people have these shared spaces, shared water, they have shared, other things. And so it's this like, I don't know. It's this kind of funny, like urbanism meets like the forest, which I love.
Because urbanism does need to meet the forest.
Yeah, totally. No, I mean, I think I want to live there. And then, in urban spaces, so much of it is about zoning, of course, and the hard fight that we're fighting right now in so many places. I think it's a moving train, is this question of low rise density. So things like accessory dwelling units and being able to divide lots and add more units. So these are the ways that we kind of encounter them, and that feels more like policy to me, whereas the rural feels like a combination of policy and design.
Oh, that's beautiful. So last question. If you could wave a magic wand, you get to see so much in your work and create anything. What would you create? What would you dream up?
My gosh. Okay. So when I first started my company, I had another company call me and say, we just got all of this venture capital and we are going to create a new city, and it's going to be perfect because you're not going to have to deal with any of the problems of existing cities. And, you can do whatever you want. What would you do? That's like not work for you. The reality is that cities are complicated places for a reason. And what would I want to do if I could do anything? I mean, I think I would incrementally solve for long and sustainable change that opens up many more pathways for design that looks different than the things that we stamp out right now. And we've been talking about single family homes, but that's bigger buildings too.
Yeah.
So break the algorithm, I say. That's what I would do.
That is so interesting. Well, I could talk to you for hours, but because we're sipping and solving, we're going to keep it short. And by the way, we did not plan to match today, but like this just shows the synergy. It shows the synergy. So we're really proud of all the work that you're doing. We're so grateful that you're at the GSD, guiding the brightest minds in the design world, and just can't wait to continue to follow the great work that you're doing. So thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
You too, Catherine. I'm going to be following you as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.